Nice to be here, day 2 of SweTugg. Hope you had a great first day. So this session will be a lap around GitHub. So it's going to be pretty broad, not too deep. So hopefully you'll learn something that you don't know already. My name is Jakob Ehn. I'm working for Active Solution, a consultancy company based here in Stockholm, but also in Örebro and a few other places where we're having a lot of fun implementing custom software for our clients, mainly on the Azure platform, either helping them migrate to it or building new solutions on it. And hopefully yesterday, how many tried our Lego game yesterday? Well, you're not allowed. Wow. Okay. So we have a booth over there, and I really recommend you, if you like Lego or if you like to compete or if you just like to have fun, you should come to our booth and try the active speed building. So build some Lego and be creative on time and win prizes. And as a further treat, I actually brought some golden Lego bricks. Now you can say, ooh, it's golden. So I have 5 of these, and so anyone who asks a question, either during the presentation or come up afterwards, you're going to get a golden Lego brick, and that will actually give you a guaranteed prize. So, I mean, what's not to like, right? Oh, wow, first question.
What's the prize?
It's a I won't answer that, actually. So, is that a question or is it a meta question? I don't know. Another question. Sorry? It has to be a question like kind of related to the presentation. Okay. You got the idea. It's good to ask questions. All right, let's get started. So I actually included a short history of GitHub. There's a lot more to it than this. And it's not as linear as I've shown here in terms of growth. But it's actually been around for 15 years. I didn't actually know that myself when it was actually founded back in 2008. And within a year, they had around almost 50,000 public repositories. Software giants like Twitter and Facebook joined GitHub back then, and since then, like the growth of course has been quite phenomenal. And this year, like just a few weeks ago, they announced that they have reached their goal, which was actually set for 2025, I think, to reach 100 million developers, which is quite staggering. So, of course, a phenomenal growth in terms of users. Mainly driven, of course, by the open source community, which is like GitHub is a home for that. But GitHub is also for the enterprise, and this is where they have been investing a lot in recent times. And back in 2018 is when Microsoft acquired GitHub, which I think caused a little bit of concern in the community. You know, what will happen with GitHub now? Will Microsoft kind of convert it to be all enterprise and so on? But I think it's fair to say that you know, they have left GitHub to be, you know, alone and do as they please. And if you look at the things that they have been implementing since, it's a lot of really, really good, very, very innovative functionality, such as GitHub Actions for CI/CD, Codespaces, Copilot, a lot around security. And I will cover these things going forward. So I'll talk about like the main core features, and then I'm going to try to demo most of these things. So how many here are using GitHub today? A lot of you. That's good. How many are using it in your enterprise? So considerably less there. And that's really common. How many are using Azure DevOps today in the enterprise? Yeah, so that's a lot more. And I'm not going to talk like the comparison here. This is more, you know, you get to know what GitHub is. But there's a lot of questions and debate around what should we do going forward. And I'm happy to discuss that afterwards. If you come to the booth, we can talk about like similarities between GitHub and Azure DevOps and how can I migrate and so on. Because that's a lot of questions around it. But let's just walk through like the main features here. So obviously, the core of GitHub is its repositories. This has been around from day one. And you know, they were basically the first big hosted provider of Git, which till this day still creates the confusion. Like some people think that Git and GitHub is the same thing, right? But it's like this is the core of it. This is where you work, where you have your code, and the concept of pull requests was really something that GitHub founded, and you know, obviously is available in other Git providers as well. But But you have additional things like you can protect your branches, you can add things like status checks to make sure that the code you're actually merging into your master branch is of good quality and so on. And I'll show you a demo of that later. Next up is the GitHub Issues. So this is a pretty developer-centric way of planning and organizing your work. So this is tied to the repository. So every repository has its set of issues. And it's quite simple in terms of functionality. You have basically a list of issues. You can add labels to them to add metadata. You can group them into milestone to plan your releases. And this is the way that most open source projects are working. And it works fine. It's not really suitable maybe for most enterprises where you have multiple teams working across multiple repos, and you want to kind of organize it on a higher level, kind of maybe plan how the teams are working and coordinate releases and so on. So they have had something called GitHub Projects for a while, but a year or two ago they rewrote the whole thing. So now it's called GitHub Projects New, and the other one is called Classic. And this is an interesting approach, I think. They basically took the spreadsheet approach, and they thought basically that Excel is probably the most used project management tool in the world, not just project management, like any kind of tool, because the spreadsheet is really flexible. It lets you just view the things you want in the way that you want it. So it's actually modeled around a spreadsheet terminology where you have you can grab the issues from various repositories, and then you can choose to group them, to filter them, slice them any way you want, and you can just tag the views and store them for later. And so the thing is, this is now scoped to the whole organization, which means that you can create a project and span then multiple repositories, so multiple teams working within the same project. So, but you still have like the board functionality, so you can select how you want to view the information. Much like in Azure DevOps as well. And of course you can add things like custom fields and so on. So, and this is fairly new, as the name implies, and they're still working on it. So, there will be more things coming. Question, but you don't get a brick.
I don't expect it. So the custom fields, are they only available in the GitHub Projects stuff? Or
Yeah.
Can you add that to an issue as well? Or is it all?
Now you add them in the project, but like the sync is then two-way. So from an issue, you can actually view the metadata attached to the project. So I'll show you that later. So, but you can work on both ways. So if you work on the issues, that will be visible in the projects, and vice versa. Codespace, blazing fast cloud developer environments. That's pretty cool. So GitHub worked they're leveraging tooling that exists in VS Code that lets you run your development environment somewhere else than on your local machine. So this is basically managed machines in the cloud, hosted by GitHub, that are customizable. So instead of you cloning the repository to your local machine, also trying to make sure that you have all the right tooling, the right versions of everything, instead you can just fire up a Codespace in the cloud, and you can work in the browser, or you can work from VS Code, but all the compilation, all the running of the things will actually run somewhere else. So that can actually solve a lot of problems. First up is get the correct machine up and running, because you can configure it to fit that particular project. So when it starts up, it already has all the things that you want on it, including like SDKs, including the extensions that you want, maybe run some setup scripts. Everything is done, so it's really easy to get started on a new project, for example. Also, you can maybe select a more powerful machine than what you have locally, and then you just pay for the amount of time and the resources that you use. GitHub Actions. This was, of course, one of the big gaps that was filled after the Microsoft acquisition. So there was no CI/CD solution for GitHub. This is basically, and I would say it's more than a CI/CD solution, even though maybe that's the most common usage to implement the build and deployment. But it's really an automation engine that lets you trigger things based on any kind of event in GitHub. So an event is typically someone pushes a code or creates a pull request, but it can also be that someone opens an issue, for example, and then you can attach a workflow to that event. So if someone opens an issue, I can trigger a workflow that maybe automatically adds that to a project, or create some documentation or what have you. So anything that goes on in GitHub is an event. You can attach that event to the workflow, and that will be run then in GitHub Actions. So you implement this using what's called a workflow, which is a YAML file. It looks like this. And if you have been working with Azure pipelines and the YAML pipelines there, it looks very, very similar. Some of the concepts isn't really the same, but it's very so syntax-wise, it's quite easy to go from one to the other. But there are some differences. So it's not just import the YAML file from Azure DevOps and run, but yeah, you get the point. It's not that different. GitHub Packages, this is for artifact management. So if you're building packages that you want to reuse across your application or across your organization, you can have a GitHub action, produce this, let's say, NuGet package or npm package, and you can store that in GitHub Packages and then use it somewhere else. You can actually also store Docker images here, so it's also a container registry, which is quite nice. And then we have the thing with security. And I would say this is maybe the area that GitHub has invested the most in and where they really stand out. And they're really trying to kind of solve this problem of thinking about security as early as possible. Because as with everything, this is of course not true just for security, but the longer it takes until you find the problem, the more money it will cost, the more time it will take for you to fix it. And that includes security as well. And security has always been this like afterthought, and you don't think about it until you get this production problem where you have some data leakage or what have you. So they're trying to shift security left, which means that let's try to implement things, check the security issues as early as possible, long before you reach production. And so this is a package that is called GitHub Advanced Security. And in general, many of these things are, almost all of these things are actually available if you're doing open source, if you're doing public repositories. But for your enterprise repositories, most of these things is part of that advanced security package, which is a separate license then. But here you have things like code scanning, which you can use to automatically scan your code changes for potential security or vulnerability issues. And it can then stop those changes from actually being merged in. They also have secret scanning, which is a very common problem, that you accidentally check in some token or some API key that you need to use for some external system. As soon as that is out there, if you're doing it publicly, it's a potential problem, because there's lots of bots sniffing on GitHub and finding it. So this is also part of the package. Also keeping track of your dependencies, which obviously is a big problem because you depend on so many things nowadays. So you need a way to know what am I dependent on, what licenses do they have, and do they have any potential security vulnerabilities. That's actually a lot of work, and you need tools to help you with it. So Dependabot is probably something most of you have heard about. Which is actually something that GitHub acquired and integrated a few years ago. So this is basically a bot that will look through your dependencies to see if there's any upgrades that you want to upgrade to, but also if there's any security vulnerabilities in the dependencies that you have today. So they will do a lot of work for you. If you have like hundreds and hundreds of dependencies, you can't manually go through them every day to see if there's, is there a new version, or is there a new discovered security vulnerability? So you need tooling with that, and that is what the advanced security will do for you. All right, that was the slides. So I'm going to skip over to demo a few of these things. So any questions so far? Yes, sorry. Yeah, I didn't say that, but I showed it. It means as long as the machine is running. So I'll show you Codespace in a minute or so. But basically, when you start it, either from the browser or from VS Code, the clock will start running, and then you pay for as long as you use it. If you stop using it and don't turn it off manually, it will shut down automatically within a configured time interval. But you get 60 hours per month for free, so which is pretty good. So you can use that for a week or so, but then you need to pay for the rest. Good question. So come up afterwards and take the brick. One more.
One small question I have about GitHub Projects.
Yep.
Is it going to be a competitor to Jira and Trello, or is it aiming to just have those who have projects in Excel to have everything GitHub instead? Will it be powerful or?
Well, I would say they try definitely to be a competitor. They want you to do your project management there. But we have to see if it's going to be as advanced as a Jira, for example. Jira has been around for a long time, and GitHub Projects is very, very new. And it's still a little bit maybe more developer-centric. GitHub is very much about the repository, about its developers. And so like the traditional project management role has, still maybe looking for some things that's not there yet. But as I said, project is a thing that we're working on a lot. But I don't think it's going to be, as feature rich as Jira. That's my guess, but we'll have to see. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So this question was about if GitHub Projects will be as kind of feature rich or a competitor to things like Jira and Trello. So, and you heard the answer. Okay, last question before I go on.
Have you heard anything about licensing? Because a lot of organizations such as we already have license for HTML.
Yep.
How much will it cost to using GitHub or develop? Do we need to change anything about licenses?
Yeah. Okay, so the question is about licensing, and is it okay if we take that afterwards? Because it's a question that's kind of hard to answer. Will take some time. So come up to me afterwards, and we'll talk about it. Good. I only have 2 bricks left. This is going very well. Okay, so in this case, I have my organization. It's called Cloudy Stuff, and I have 2 repositories here. One of them is called Order Web. So can you see back there? Is it okay? Yeah. So this is the traditional, like the issue view that where you store your issues, and you can use things like labels to add metadata. And of course, you can filter on these labels and so on. And then you can group your issues into milestones. So you can say, this is my 1.0 release that contains a few issues and so on. So I won't talk too much about this. This has been around for like 15 years or so. And it works really well for open source projects where you don't really have that super advanced project management workflow needed. You just need a simple way of tracking work, raising issues, working with pull requests and so on. So, but again, this list of issues is kind of tied to the repository. So for GitHub Projects then, that's actually scoped to the organization. So if I go to my organization and I go to projects, this is where I can now create a project that will actually span my repositories. So I'm going to create just a new one from scratch, so you can see how that works. And you can use this wizard to kind of get started using some predefined templates, but I'm going to create one from scratch. And you can see that they're naming it like table, which is like the metaphor here. So you have a table, or you can view it as a board. But I'm going to select the table. And so now I basically get a spreadsheet where I can start adding issues. But what I typically want to do now is to add, in this case, I already have issues in my repositories. So I'm going to grab those from my 2 repositories. So in this case, you can see actually that it's listing my issues and also my pull requests. So pull request is also something in GitHub that you can actually plan, because typically working on a pull request, reviewing it, maybe doing the work associated with it, is actually something that requires work. So you can actually work with pull requests pretty much in the same way that you would work with issues here. But to make it easier, I can also filter out. In this case, I just want to grab my issues and just add them. And then I'm going to also add some issues from my other repository. So you can think of this as 2 different teams. I have the infra team and I have my order web team. So I'm just grabbing those 2 teams' issues into my backlog now. So basically now I have a list of issues here, and I have some predefined columns over here. So since this is a spreadsheet, it's typically very easy to enter data and update data just using, you can use the keyboard. So for example, if I just want to update some status here, I can just easily do like this. Maybe this one is in progress, so some more like this. So very, very easy to just quickly work on data. This is like the spreadsheet analogy here. That's what it's really good about. So that's one of the things. The other one now is I can also select how I want to view this data, right? So this is now just a list, but maybe I want to group this list. I want to see it maybe grouped by who it's assigned to. So in this case, I'm pretty alone in this project, so I'm the only user here. So, but now I can see the issues grouped on, in this case, me, or in this other people who has assigned to the issues. And when I'm grouping like this, I can also now drag things from here, and by doing that I also automatically assign the issue to the user since I'm grouping it on that value. I can also select to filter. So if I do filter, I can do assign. Oops. Assignee and select myself. So now I just see, for example, issues that are assigned to myself. And so you can work with this kind of view and then configure it the way you want to. And when you're done with it, you'll save it as a predefined view. So you don't have to do it every time, obviously. You save it as a view. And you then can multiple of this view, right? So I'm going to remove this one. And I want to start with having my product backlog. So to do that, I also want to track like how much work is attached to this, or how much work are we estimating these issues to. So I want to add a new field here. You can see I can select from some of these predefined fields that's already there. So maybe labels is something I want to add. So let's grab this one. But I also want to create a new field for tracking story points. So I'm just going to create a new one called story points. And this one is going to be a numeric field. So let's create that one. And I'll just drag it over here so you can see better. And again, very easy, obviously, to attach some story points. This one is really hard. So I see, really easy to work with this. Okay, so this is pretty good. I am happy with this one. This is my product backlog. So I'm just going to rename it to product backlog. And then you can see it's a little blue dot there. That means I have changes that I haven't saved. So that's now one of my views. So if you go to this project now, you can see the backlog view. But then let's say maybe we're working as a kind of a Scrum team. We're working with sprints, iterations. So let's create another view that shows me the work in the current sprint. So first to do that, I need a field for actually storing the sprint in. So I'm going to create one more field, call that sprint. And then there's a special field type called the iteration. And it's actually going to help me by just quickly creating a few of these iterations. So let's say that this current iteration, it actually starts on Monday, and it's 2 weeks long. So save and create. Let's move this around. So you can see by default now I got 3 different iterations, 2 weeks from each other. So again, let's just quickly drag some of this into the sprint. Do this one as well. Okay. So obviously I could, for example, now group this on sprints. So now I see work like planned out across sprints. But in this case, I actually want to just view the work in the current sprint. That's a very common way to view your work. So in this case, I would then filter again. In this case, I want to filter on sprint. And then you can also see that there are these like kind of macros. So I can use, so it's not just hard-coded values, I can actually refer to, for example, the current sprint. So now I automatically see this is the current sprint of work. And again, I can now just save this one. Actually, I want to rename it first to sprint backlog and save it. So again, now I've seen this as a table view, but I can also view to watch this as a board view. So this familiar with. So this is a way that a lot of people want to view their work because it's easy to visualize the the state of things. But again, you can select to group this by various fields here. You don't have to. By default, it's going to group on status, but you can group, for example, on sprint. So now I have a board view, and the sprints are going this way. So you see, it's very flexible. It's simple in a way, but it's also very flexible. So it's an interesting approach, I think. So there's actually a third way type of view here. So you had table and board, and the third one is a roadmap, which is actually a way for you to kind of visualize the release progress maybe on a higher level. So in this case, I can, for example, zoom out a little bit, and I can kind of plan my work going forward in time here. This is a view that is very popular within many enterprises, to have this kind of higher level view where you can kind of coordinate things, maybe visualize dependencies, which order they need to be made for you to reach some milestone. All right. Any questions on projects before we start coding? One question. Yeah, actually, I won't show that in the interest of time, but there is something called the task list in issues and projects. So you can actually create a hierarchy of work. So you can specify that on this story actually consists of 4 or 5 tasks, and then they are tracked by each other. So you can also actually create a view that will show you like kind of the parent and the child in this kind of view. Yes, another question. You have a brick waiting. Yeah. Are
they specific for your account or for the global project?
No, they're for the project. Yeah. All right. So actually, let's create a new ticket here, and let's go back to my regular view here, maybe. So actually, let's do like this. When I create a new issue, I can either select to create it straight into one of the repositories, like this. So I'm going to create change background color, and store that kind of in the order web repository. But I create it from here. But I could also create it from that repository and have it be visualized in this project. There's also this concept of draft issues in projects. So if I just start typing here now, new story, it's actually I'm gonna zoom in so you can see. It's actually it looks like this now, and that means it's a draft issue. So I haven't yet converted it to a real issue, but this is a way for you to quickly just track, capture ideas and discussions before you have kind of fleshed out the details. So I can then fill out the details, and when I'm done with it, I can convert it to an issue. So I will do convert and then store it in the order web like this, and then it's actually now a real issue. Okay, but let's work on that ticket that I created. So when you are browsing a GitHub repository like this anywhere, you can hit the dot, and if you hit dot, you'll enter the browser-based editor of GitHub. And so this is actually quite nice if you just want to do some very quick change. It doesn't really require you to compile anything. So I could actually now, within the browser, make a change to the code, create a branch. So in this case, I want to change the background color. So which I'm going to synchronize. Was there a question? Yes. Oh yeah, there is. I didn't have time to show you that, but there is charts that you can create for GitHub projects. So you can get the burn-ups, and you can create charts using a kind of a predefined query. Yeah. So I could actually make the change here, and I can also, if I change the color of the background to beige, it's going to track that change. And I can also create the branch from here and actually, check this change in straight from the browser like this. And that works, fine for very small changes. But if quite often when I work on code, I actually want to run that code to verify it. So if I go to the run view here, this is VS Code in the browser. It actually says you can't run the thing here in the browser, which kind of makes sense. But then I can select to create this code space instead. So I can actually from here select create new code space. And then it's going to ask me for what size of code space do you want. So basically, how much money do you have? How fast do you want to work? So I'm going to select this one, 4 cores. And oh no, not found. I had problems with CodeSpace yesterday. This was interesting. I'm going to try to create it from the other way as well. Let's see if that works better. So also, if you go to like the common way now would be to clone the code to your local machine and work there. But so that would be the local. If you select CodeSpace here, this is where you can also configure the things. So let's see if it works better from here. And now you also see like the things you can configure here. So you select a branch that you want to work on, and then you select the configuration. I'll come back to that. This is how you can actually configure what this machine looks like. You can select the region, and you can select again the 4 core. So let's see if this works better from now. Okay, looks better. So now what happens now is that GitHub spins up a machine somewhere in the cloud. In this case, it's going to use a customized image that I have defined using what's called a dev container JSON file. But you don't have to do that. You can use a default image that contains like a basic set of tools that will work for many cases. But typically, when you have more advanced projects, you want to have a customized image here. And in this case, that's why it takes a little bit longer than if you use the default image, because I'm running some things on the startup to make sure that I have the tooling and the extensions that I want for this particular project, right? So that's the point here. So in this case, I'm using it's a project with the 3 different components. It's a web, it's an API, and it's a background job, and so on. And I'm using something called Dapper. Has anyone used Dapper? It's not the SQL ORM, another Dapper. Okay, doesn't really matter in this case, but I'm using Dapper, which means I need to have some specific tooling. I want to have an extension to work with Dapper and so on. And that's the thing. If I clone this locally, I need to make sure that I have those things installed. So maybe there's a README file somewhere, and hopefully the developers look at that. Hopefully the README file is updated, so you know what to install before working on it. And those things, like in the long run, there's always a lot of work with that. And me as a consultant, every time I go to a new client, I spend a lot of time, unfortunately, getting things running on my local machine because things are out of date. The documentation isn't really there. So it's really much better to kind of codify that. So now I'm in a code space. I'm still in the browser. If I want to, I can also open this in VS Code. But this means I can actually compile it. So I can use the regular commands for compiling. But everything is now happening on the machine somewhere else. But I'm kind of fronting it from my local machine here, like this, straight from the browser. But over here you can see I have actually this is the Dapper extension. It's already installed for me. But also the tooling for Dapper was also installed as part of the setup of this code space. So let's make that change to change the background color. So let's head over here. And let's go for beige. And let's run it. And you shouldn't have high hopes for the appearance of this application, but it should at least have a beige background color. So now I'm running the application, and so now it's a bit interesting, of course. Like, okay, I'm running it on the machine in the cloud somewhere, but how do I actually access it? Because I'm here on my local machine, right? So in general, VS Code has this functionality of automatically like trying to figure out which ports are being used. So in this case with Dapper, there's actually a lot of ports here, but I'm going to select my web application and just open that one. So, and there it is, and it's with the, can you see it's actually beige? Okay, yeah, bad choice of color. It's beautiful. But so this is kind of cool. Can actually access my application, it's running on a machine somewhere through this public URL. Well, at least you would think it's public, but it's not, obviously, because you don't want to expose this to the outside world. So if I would take that URL and I would just paste it in a incognito browser, I need to authenticate using my GitHub credentials. But you can actually, if you want to show this to some external person, you can actually go back here and say, I want to expose this port. I want to change the visibility to be public, like this. And if I do that, I can actually, anyone can actually access it. And as I said before, if I want to now, I can also, if I don't want to work in the browser, I want to work in VS Code, I can select Open VS Code Desktop, and it's going to open up, and just still VS Code is on your machine, but everything else is happening on in the code space. So this is actually really, really powerful for many reasons that I mentioned before. Quickly get started. Use the type of machine you want. Sometimes you can use a really fast machine and pay a little bit more, but in many cases you can use a slower machine. And then of course you'll turn it off when you're not using it to actually save money. And if I don't use it, I just walk away, it's going to by default shut down within 30 minutes. And then you only pay for a small amount for the actual storage of that code space. And you can have many of these code spaces. You can have multiple code spaces for the same repository. If you have like a mono repository, you might want to have different ones, and that's perfectly fine. And I'm just going to push this change. So let's make a little feature branch here, and so a background color, and just change color, commit and push. And then say, hey, you want to maybe create a pull request? Actually, I do. So I can create the pull request. This is part of the GitHub extension that you get automatically. So I can just create it from here without actually leaving my development environment, which is quite nice. So now I have a pull request here. If I want to, I can head over to the regular view here. All right. So that was Codespace. Any questions on that? Before seeing what happens next. So, okay, we made the change of code. We created a pull request. So, and the intent of a pull request is obviously to kind of validate the changes before we merge it to master and deploy it somewhere. So this is the pull request, and of course this is where you would do the code review. I can have my colleague Peter go in there and having some witty remarks and so on. But in addition to that, Peter won't catch everything. So typically this is where we want to have tooling to help me validate the changes for various reasons. So, and this is the case where you have these status checks, right? So, and I have multiple of these now actually. So you can see that it's actually running now. And it says it hasn't completed yet. So I have, for example, one which is the build, the second one here. And that is a way for me, obviously, to build my changes, make sure that it actually compiles, that any tests are good to go before we're merging it. But I can do more things as well, and I have some code QL. That's part of the security thing that I will mention in a few minutes. But this is a way for me to actually scan the changes that I made and make sure that I don't have any security vulnerability, security issues. So I can have that running as part of my pull request before I merge it to master, right? So that's like as early as possible. A question? No, you can't use Codespaces exactly. But what you can do, and I can quickly go back to here. So, like what I mentioned about how you customize these machines, it's called the dev container file. It looks like this. In this case, this is where you specify like which extensions do I want to have. So here I'm listing the extensions that I want to have, including the Dapper one. I'm having things like commands that runs when the code space starts up. But actually this thing, the dev container, that's actually part of VS Code. And you can use this technology on your local machine using a container instead. then you still have to run it on a machine that you provision, but you get many of the same benefits actually. But Codespace adds this and host this for you. But you can use the dev. So if you search for dev container and VS Code, you'll find everything you need for actually using this on premise. But then you have to provide the machines and so on. Good question. Yes.
GitHub Actions, can you use that for deployment as well?
Yes. And I will show you. So let's take a look at the GitHub Actions. So in this case, I'm using it for validating. So let's head over to my build here. So for the pull request, I just want to build. So it actually, you can see over here that it has deployed jobs, but they weren't triggered now in this case. So I only trigger them when I actually merge the change to master. But this is the build. And if you head over to the Actions tab, you can see I have a few actions over here. So the order web is the build one. And let's take a look how that action actually looks. So again, this is YAML that we all love. And again, if you have been working with Azure pipelines, it's quite familiar in how you structure it, but there are some key things here. The first one is the on attribute. This is where you specify the triggers. How should I trigger this workflow? So in this case, I'm triggering it on the pull request. I'm triggering it on when someone pushes something to master. And then also the little strange name called workflow dispatch, which basically means I can manually trigger this workflow as well, which is convenient when you want to rerun it or when you want to work on it without having a code change to it. The next up then is the jobs. So typically you have one, or you always have one job, but you can also have multiple jobs. In this case, I have 3 jobs. The first one is the build job, which in this case uses Docker to build my container images. And if we go down a bit, we can see that I have also the deploy to test, and then further down I have the deploy to production as well. So it's 3 jobs, and you can also see the little condition actually here. This is one way now to say that I don't want to run this if it's a pull request. So that allows me to use the same workflow, both for my PR validation, but also for the deployment. So I don't have to have different workflows here. This is one workflow for me to define. But you can have multiple if you want to. That's perfectly fine. So when you come to deployment then, or to build, the next thing is obviously you have these various steps that you use. So the steps can use either the predefined actions that are either distributed from GitHub or from the public community. So in this case, for example, I'm using the checkout action to check out my code, but then I'm using another action here, in this case for doing some token replacement. So you can see that the little bit of strange name. So I'm actually using now a public action developed by someone else. And that's also a lot of questions like how do you make sure to secure that, right? And there are various approaches to that. One is obviously to actually fork that repository and store that repository yourself and point to that one instead. So it's a trade-off between then you have to update it yourself, but it will be more secure and so on. And then when it comes to deployment, typically you want to have some way of configuring or specifying the configuration values for that particular environment. So you can see I have some environment variables there. Some of them are just defined inline. Some of them are referring to secrets, which is not obviously something that I want to check in. So if we step out of here and go to my settings for this repository, and we can go down to secrets. You can see down here that you can scope the secrets to 3 different things: the actions, the Codespaces, and also the Dependabot. And if I go to actions, this is where I've specified that I have various secrets here, and some of them are bound to the repository. It's the same for the whole repository, no matter which workflow I have. Some of them are bound to a particular environment. So I have, for example, I need credentials to deploy this to Azure, and those credentials are different in test and production. So if I go to manage environments, This is where I specify that I have 2 different environments here. I have the test environment and my production environment. And you can see that they both have their own secrets. So if I go to the production, this is where the secrets are specified. I can't access them I can see them from here, obviously, but they're stored here, and I can refer to them from my workflow. Sorry? 10 minutes, perfect. So let's see if the pull request is done. It's green and nice, so we can see that all the checks actually went green. So now I can merge it. It will merge the master. It will trigger the same pipeline again. But this time it will actually also deploy it to my test and production environment. So I merge it, and that should now trigger another action that will start again building it again from the master branch, and then it's going to deploy it to my test environment, and so on. So while we're waiting for that to happen, we can head over to the security parts. So I kind of touched upon it as part of the pull request, and as part of this shifting security left, running things like security checks, vulnerability scanning as soon as possible, and a pull request is a great way to do that. So if you go to the security tab here, you can see that says a little number 7 here, which means there's something I should probably look at. So I have a few alerts down here under vulnerability alerts. So we can start with the code scanning, and again that's part now of the pull request flow. So it has analyzed my code base, and it found like 3 things that I should fix, which is actually a vulnerability. In this case, it's a regular expression that is inefficient, which can actually, and has actually in many cases caused things to completely go down. If you write a regular expression the wrong way, it can actually consume all your resources. I think that actually happened in Azure like 2 years ago or something. There was this issue where like all the edge nodes were like 100% CPU bound, and there was like the cause was actually an inefficient regular expression. So, but you can see that these alerts were processed and found during like this pull request that we just ran, and it's by this separate workflow, so separate action. So when you configure this, you can use the default setup, and then you don't need to do anything, or you can kind of generate a GitHub action for you, and then you can customize it a little bit more. You can, for example, exclude some directories that you don't want to scan every time, and add additional things. So if we take a look at this workflow, it's pretty much generated by GitHub when I set this up, but now it is a regular action, so you can do whatever you want here. But basically, I'm using it supports multiple languages. In this case, I'm just analyzing C#, but of course you can analyze like JavaScript and Python and Go and so on. And then it's going to analyze this, and eventually it's going to create alerts. So you can pretty much start with the default setup here, but then you can add additional. If you want to scan for more things, you can add additional rules to this workflow. But it's very easy to set up and then automatically have it run as part of your pull request. So that is one thing you can use as part of the advanced security. The other problem I have here. Sorry, question. Oh yeah, let's look at one of these then. So in this case, it shows me like the problem, it points to the file. So in this case, it's in jQuery, which is not something I wrote, but I'm obviously using it. So it is a potential problem for me. And then it shows me a lot of information about this problem and a recommendation, so you can also like actually learn about this and what you should do with it, and then references to more information about this. And then you can select what you want to do with this alert. If you want to kind of dismiss it, you can do that with a reason for it, or you can create an issue, put it on the backlog, and make sure that you actually fix it. The other thing is then the secret scanning. So this is about, again, scanning for accidentally leaked keys, tokens, or what have you. So in this case, and it's a little bit interesting now, because I have 2 alerts here. So it actually found a Cosmos DB key and a Twilio account key in my repository. But if I would go to this file, I wouldn't see those keys there because I removed them. But that's the thing, right? With Git, you have the full history. So even if you check in a key and then you, oops, I did that, and then you make another commit to remove it, it's still there. It's still in the history. for anyone to find, and in particular for bots to find. So when the secret scanning runs, it actually runs through your whole history for these things. So actually, I still have this in my history, even though actually I kind of fixed it. So that's an interesting aspect of it. So this runs now every time I push code to GitHub. And if you have public repository, it automatically runs without you having to configure it. And if it is a public repository, it will actually also, in many cases, it will also actually alert the partner, actually the service provider. So actually, I have for the Twilio one, actually I store that email that I got. It's here. So I got this email from Twilio pretty much a minute after that said that okay, you have accidentally leaked a Twilio auth token. So they actually get they get a call from GitHub, automatic call, and then actually in this case they automatically revoke that token for me. All of this is automatic, right? That's pretty cool. So that's its integration with a lot of the big partners, because it's in their interest as well that you don't leak, in this case, auth token to Twilio. And the last thing I want to mention is Dependabot. So Dependabot is really nice for keeping track of your dependencies, to help you, first off, to help you, to verify, do you have old versions of your dependencies? And you can have Dependabot create pull requests for you automatically. So you don't have to do it yourself. So basically you can come in the morning and then you have a new pull request that says, hey, there's a new version of the Microsoft Graph. In this case, I actually used a really old one just to prove the point. But so this is really nice. Now I don't have to kind of manually do this. I can just go in the morning, I have a pull request. I have build that has been verified that everything still works. So now I can just hit merge and I'm done with it, right? It's really, really simple and really, really powerful. But in addition to that, it also scans for vulnerabilities in the packages that I'm already using. So even if it's the latest version, and all of a sudden there can be a discovery of a new security vulnerability, and then I will have an alert in here for the Dependabot, which says in this case, so I purposely used an old version of the sharp zip lib because I knew there was an issue there. So I just added that to my project and checked it in, and then immediately I got this alert here that specified that there's a problem, it describes the problem, and it suggests you really should upgrade to a new version because it's been fixed in that newer version. All right, I'm actually out of time, but I think I showed pretty much most of what I wanted to show you, like all of those aspects from planning to coding to building, deploying, and finally the security aspects of it. So last question. Yes? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So can we talk about that after? As I said, that's a big discussion, and there's no clear answer. But that's definitely the case. That since Microsoft bought it, I mean, before this, they tried to compete with GitHub, but then they bought GitHub, and now they have two things that do basically the same thing. So, but come up here and we'll discuss it more, because I want to leave you on time so you have time for the break. So thank you very much for coming, and have a great conference. And